3 days after the Caracas operation, I received a call that made my stomach drop. It was from an energy analyst in Houston, someone I'd known for years who specialized in South American oil markets. Her voice was shaking. Peter, do you understand what just happened? This isn't about regime change. This isn't about democracy or human rights or drug trafficking. Trump just seized control of the largest oil reserves on the planet. She was right, and the implications are terrifying. In 30 years of analyzing geopolitical conflicts, I've learned that the official justification for military action rarely matches the actual strategic objective. Iraq wasn't really about WMDs. Libya wasn't really about protecting civilians. In Venezuela, Venezuela isn't really about Nicolas Maduro. It's about 300 billion barrels of crude oil, and the precedent that America can simply take whatever it needs. The numbers that explain everything. Let me give you some context that every major power on earth understands, but that somehow gets lost in our domestic political discussions. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world, not the largest in South America, not the largest outside the Middle East, the largest, period. 300.9 billion barrels of proven reserves. To put that in perspective, that's more oil than Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq combined, more than Russia has ever claimed to possess, more than the United States has ever dreamed of controlling. But here's the part that makes this whole operation make sense from a purely strategic perspective. Location, location, location. Saudi oil has to travel 8,000 miles to reach American refineries, passing through some of the most unstable choke points on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Gibraltar Strait. Any one of those could be closed by hostile powers, cutting off America's energy supply in a matter of hours. Venezuelan oil, it's 1,200 miles from Houston, same time zone, same hemisphere. And now, thanks to Saturday morning's operation, same management structure. This wasn't regime change. This was a hostile corporate takeover. The moment Trump said the quiet part out loud, at his press conference on Saturday afternoon, while Maduro was literally being processed through the federal court system, Trump said something that should have made headlines around the world but somehow got buried beneath all the other shocking revelations. A reporter asked him about Venezuela's future governance, standard diplomatic question, the kind that usually gets answered with careful language about supporting democratic institutions and respecting the will of the Venezuelan people. Instead, Trump said, "We are going to run Venezuela. We're going to run it until we can do a safe transition to proper leadership." Run Venezuela. Not support a transition government, not work with international partners, not facilitate democratic elections, run Venezuela like it's a subsidiary of the United States government. But then he said something even more revealing. We're going to take back their oil. It was stolen from us through rigged elections and corrupt deals. We're taking it back. Taking it back, as if Venezuelan oil somehow belonged to America in the first place. That phrase, taking it back, reveals everything about Trump's worldview that traditional foreign policy experts refuse to acknowledge. He doesn't see Venezuela's resources as Venezuelan. He sees them as temporarily mismanaged American assets. The precedent that changes everything. Here's what keeps me awake at 3 a.m. staring at my wall of maps and trying to game out the implications of what just happened. For 75 years, the international system has operated on a simple principle. Sovereignty means control over your natural resources. You might not like how another country manages its oil or its lithium or its rare earth minerals, but you can't just take them because you want them. Trump just shredded that principle. The legal justification for the Caracas operation was Maduro's indictment on drug trafficking charges. Fine. But within hours of capturing him, Trump was openly discussing taking control of Venezuela's oil production, installing American management in Venezuelan refineries, and redirecting Venezuelan petroleum exports to serve American strategic interests. That's not law enforcement, that's colonialism. And the precedent is now set. Any country with resources America needs can be declared a narco state or a terrorist sponsor or a threat to regional security, and their leadership can be extracted and their assets seized. Think about the countries that are nervously watching this unfold. Mexico, with its massive lithium deposits. Bolivia, with the largest lithium reserves in the world. The Democratic Republic of Congo, with 70% of global cobalt production. Chile, which controls a third of the world's copper supply. Every resource-rich country on Earth just learned that sovereignty is conditional on American approval. The Houston connection, when markets predict war. I've been tracking something that should scare the hell out of anyone who understands how energy markets work. Starting 3 weeks before the Caracas operation, 3 weeks before anyone outside a very small circle knew what was being planned, certain oil companies started making very specific strategic moves. Chevron, which had been forced to halt Venezuelan operations due to U.S. sanctions, quietly began repositioning technical teams and equipment in Caribbean staging areas. ExxonMobil started negotiating new refinery capacity contracts specifically designed to handle Venezuelan heavy crude. Shell began recruiting Spanish-speaking petroleum engineers with experience in South American operations. They knew what was coming. By Wednesday afternoon, less than 72 hours after Maduro's capture, Chevron's stock had gained 23%, ExxonMobil was up 19%, the entire energy sector was rallying like they'd just discovered oil on the moon. But here's the truly disturbing part. When I reached out to contacts in these companies, they weren't celebrating because they thought Venezuelan oil would eventually return to global markets under some future democratic government. They were celebrating because they'd been briefed on transition plans that would give American companies direct operational control over Venezuelan oil infrastructure within 90 days. This wasn't speculation about future market opportunities. This was advanced knowledge of a done deal. The failure of sanctions, why diplomacy stopped working. To understand why Trump chose this nuclear option, you need to understand just how spectacularly economic sanctions had failed to achieve American strategic objectives. For 20 years, the United States had tried every form of economic pressure short of direct military intervention. Asset freezes, banking restrictions, technology export controls, secondary sanctions that punished other countries for trading with Venezuela. The result? Venezuelan oil production dropped from 3.5 million barrels per day in 2000 to barely 700,000 barrels per day by 2025. The Venezuelan economy collapsed. Millions of Venezuelans fled to neighboring countries, creating the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. But Maduro stayed in power. Worse, from America's perspective, Venezuela's oil didn't disappear, it just got redirected. China became Venezuela's largest customer, paying for crude with manufactured goods and infrastructure investment. Russia provided technical expertise and military equipment in exchange for long-term supply contracts. Iran sent tankers and refining technology, creating a sanctions-busting network that actually strengthened anti-American alliances. By 2025, Venezuela had become the center of what intelligence analysts call the axis of oil, a China-Russia-Iran-Venezuela partnership that was effectively operating an alternative energy market completely outside American control. Sanctions weren't weakening America's enemies, they were strengthening them. The geographic logic of energy imperialism. As someone who thinks about geography professionally, I can see the cold, calculating logic behind Trump's decision to abandon diplomacy in favor of direct action. Energy security isn't just about economics, it's about geography. And the geography of global energy supply chains has some terrifying vulnerabilities that most Americans don't understand. Roughly 40% of the world's oil travels through just 5 choke points: the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the Bosporus, and the Danish Straits. Any one of those could be closed by hostile powers, cutting off energy supplies to major economies within days. America has spent trillions of dollars over the past 50 years protecting those choke points, maintaining naval bases and alliance structures specifically designed to keep energy flowing, but it's an incredibly expensive and vulnerable system. Venezuelan oil changes that equation completely. With Venezuelan production under American control, the United States could theoretically supply its entire domestic energy needs from sources within the Western Hemisphere. Mexico, Canada, and now Venezuela could provide enough crude oil to make America completely energy independent from Middle Eastern suppliers. That's not just economic advantage, that's strategic transformation. An America that doesn't depend on Middle Eastern oil is an America that can withdraw from the Middle East entirely. No more costly military deployments to the Persian Gulf. No more complex alliance relationships with Saudi Arabia and other problematic partners. No more vulnerability to Iranian threats to close shipping lanes. But it requires controlling Venezuelan oil, and Maduro wasn't willing to sell. The corporate reaction when business cheers for conquest? What's been most disturbing about the aftermath isn't the military operation itself, it's how quickly American business interests have embraced what is essentially the conquest of a sovereign country. Within 48 hours of Maduro's capture, I started receiving calls from energy sector analysts who were treating the whole thing like a normal business development. Conference calls about Venezuelan transition opportunities, investment reports analyzing the upside potential of regime change, corporate strategy sessions focused on optimizing asset allocation in post-Maduro Venezuela. They're talking about conquest like it's a merger and acquisition. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the subtext explicit in his interview with CBS. When asked how this intervention was different from the Iraq War, he said, "We spent decades and decades and purchased in blood and got nothing economically in return, and President Trump flips the script. Got nothing economically in return." Think about the implications of that statement. A sitting defense secretary is explicitly saying that military interventions should generate economic returns for the United States, that conquest is justified if it's profitable. This isn't even neo-colonialism, traditional colonialism, at least pretended to be about spreading civilization or religion. This is just naked resource extraction justified by military superiority. The Maduro precedent, a template for global resource seizure. Here's what's keeping international relations experts awake at night. The Caracas operation wasn't just successful, it was easy. Trump has created a template that can be applied anywhere in the world where America needs resources and the local government isn't cooperative. Step 1. Identify a resource-rich country with a government that doesn't align with American interests. Step 2. Find some legal justification, drug trafficking, terrorism, human rights violations, election fraud. Step 3. Position military assets under cover of some routine operation, anti-drug patrols, training exercises, humanitarian missions. Step 4. Execute a precision strike designed to capture leadership rather than occupy territory. Step 5. Install American management over the targeted resources while the international community issues strongly worded statements. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is the playbook that just worked perfectly in Venezuela. And the beauty of it, from a purely strategic perspective, is that it's incredibly difficult to counter. Traditional military deterrence doesn't work because America isn't threatening to occupy territory just to extract leadership. Alliance structures don't work because the operations are too fast for international coordination. Economic retaliation doesn't work because the targeted countries usually have smaller economies than individual American states. It's a nearly perfect system for resource acquisition. The next target's W's vulnerable. If you think Venezuela was a one-off operation, you haven't been paying attention to Trump's increasingly explicit threats against other resource-rich countries. Mexico sits on massive lithium deposits that are essential for battery production. President Claudia Sheinbaum has been nationalizing those resources and limiting American corporate access. Trump has already started describing Mexico as being run by cartels, the same language he used about Venezuela 6 months before the Caracas operation. Bolivia has the largest lithium reserves in the world, controlled by a leftist government that has been making deals with China instead of American companies. Colombia produces 70% of the world's cocaine, but also has significant oil reserves and gold deposits. Cuba has untapped offshore oil reserves and strategic positioning that controls access to the Gulf of Mexico. Every single one of these countries has been mentioned in Trump's recent statements as potential targets for military action. The pattern is becoming clear. Any country with resources America needs that is governed by leaders who won't cooperate with American corporate interests is now vulnerable to the Maduro treatment. The transformation of American foreign policy. What we witnessed in Caracas represents a fundamental shift in how America projects power globally. For 75 years, American foreign policy was built around alliance structures, international law, and at least the pretense of multilateral cooperation. That era is over. Trump has discovered that America's military superiority is so overwhelming that it can simply take what it wants without meaningful resistance. The international community will issue statements, the UN will hold emergency meetings, allies will express concern, but nobody will actually stop America from doing whatever it decides to do. This isn't isolationism, this is its opposite. This is the most aggressive form of American expansionism since the 19th century, justified not by ideology or security concerns, but by simple resource acquisition. The Monroe Doctrine declared that the Western Hemisphere was America's sphere of influence. The Trump Doctrine goes further. It declares that any resource America needs anywhere in the world is a legitimate target for American action. The cliffhanger that leads to Greenland As I write this, Trump is holding daily press conferences where he casually discusses American management of Venezuelan oil production like it's the most natural thing in the world. Chevron executives are reportedly already in Caracas conducting assessments of refinery capacity. The Venezuelan opposition is split between those celebrating Maduro's removal and those horrified by American corporate occupation. But Venezuela was just the proof of concept. The real test of Trump's new doctrine comes next: Greenland. Denmark isn't Venezuela. Greenland isn't controlled by a regime America can label as illegitimate. The resources there, rare earth minerals essential for military technology, are controlled by a NATO ally with the explicit protection of the entire Western alliance structure. If Trump can take Greenland, he can take anything. The methodology has been established. The precedent has been set. The American military machine has demonstrated it can reach anywhere and extract any leadership it deems problematic. What happens when an irresistible force, American resource, needs meets an immovable object? NATO's mutual defense guarantees. We're about to find out. The Venezuelan gambit wasn't the end of Trump's expansion, it was the beginning.